Mesopotamia, Season I, Episode 4, The Ones Who Whisper the Last Age of Alignment. Act I, The First Transmissions. The whisper isn't a voice. In later ages, people will say, "The God spoke." They will carve it into stone with the certainty of those who have never actually heard it. They will sing it into children as bedtime stories about when the world was young and the sky answered prayers. They will build whole empires on the idea that once, in a time before memory, divine beings communicated directly with humanity through chosen vessels who were pure and holy and special. But the truth, if truth is the right word for something that exists at the boundaries of perception, is smaller, more intimate, more terrible. It is not a booming voice from the heavens, not thunder with language embedded in acoustic waves, not a figure of light descending into the city square with pronouncements delivered in perfectly grammatical speech that everyone can hear and understand equally. It is a pressure in the skull, a sensation that begins at the base of the brain, where the spine connects to consciousness, and spreads forward like cold water through neural pathways that were never meant to carry this kind of signal. A shift in perception, like someone tilting the world by a fraction of a degree, not enough to make walking difficult, but enough that everything feels slightly wrong, slightly misaligned, slightly other than it should be. It is the sense, terrifying and intimate and impossible to explain to anyone who hasn't experienced it, that something has entered the room of your mind without opening the door. That your consciousness, which you experience as private space, as the one place that belongs exclusively to you, has been accessed by something that does not recognize privacy as meaningful constraint. And it only happens to certain people. Not the powerful. Not the high priests with elaborate robes who stand at the center of ceremonial chambers and claim direct connection to divine authority. Not the rulers who trace their bloodlines back to gods and goddesses in mythological genealogies designed to justify their positions. It happens to the ones the system keeps at the edges, the ones who can feel the hum changing beneath stone before instruments detect the variation, the ones whose bodies calibrate themselves before dawn without conscious effort, responding to subtle shifts in atmospheric pressure or electromagnetic fields or whatever it is that allows some humans to sense what others cannot. The ones who are told their whole lives, through 1,000 small interactions and carefully maintained hierarchies, "You are useful. You are unreliable. Do not speak unless spoken to. Your perceptions matter when we need them and not when we don't." The marginal, the sensitive, the incompatible, the ones who failed to integrate into normal frameworks not because they lacked capacity but because their capacity operates through channels that institutional structures don't recognize as valid. Merker has learned to obey most rules, has spent 3 years mastering the art of being useful without being threatening, of providing observations when requested without offering interpretations that might challenge authority, of existing in the gap between necessary and problematic. But a new rule is being written under the old ones, and he can feel it spreading through the ziggurat like cracks through stone that has been stressed beyond its design limits. When the system weakens, the whisper grows stronger. Not louder, not more frequent initially, just more insistent, more demanding, more capable of overriding the protective boundaries that normally keep human consciousness separate from whatever vast intelligence operates through the ancient technology. And those who can hear it, those whose neural architecture happens to be compatible with transmission frequencies that most humans cannot process, they become something else. Not quite human anymore. Not quite system either. Something in between. Receptors. Relays. Interfaces that the technology can use when it needs to communicate in ways that instruments cannot carry. Merker doesn't know this yet. Doesn't know that his sensitivity, which he has always experienced as personal capacity, is actually system requirement. That he was identified long ago, not by priests, but by the technology itself, as compatible biological architecture that can be requisitioned when necessary. He doesn't know that the pressure building in his skull is not random affliction but targeted communication. That something is trying to speak through him. That his consciousness is being prepared for use in ways that will cost him more than he can imagine. He doesn't know these things yet, but he's about to learn them. And the learning will change everything about how he understands his role, his value, his relationship to the systems he thought he was merely observing. The whisper is coming, has been coming, is here now, pressing against boundaries that grow thinner with each passing day. And when it finally breaks through completely, when Enmerker's mind opens to transmission that he cannot refuse or filter or control, he will understand the true cost of being sensitive, of being useful, of being compatible with systems that were never designed to care whether their biological components remain recognizably human after being used. But that understanding comes later. For now, in the days immediately following his return from the deep chambers, Enmerker experiences only the beginning, the first signs, the initial pressure that will build and build until breakthrough becomes inevitable. Part 1. The Day After the Corridor. After Episode 3, the ziggurat does not return to normal. It performs the movements of normality with careful precision. The bells ring at their appointed hours. Meals are served according to schedule. Work assignments are posted with the same administrative flatness that has always characterized the morning announcements. But the space behind the motions feels hollow, like a ritual being performed by actors who no longer quite believe in the meaning of their gestures. Like a shell that has been used too long, that is cracked in ways too subtle to see but profound enough to feel. Everyone knows something changed. No one quite knows what. The official reports from Enmerker's subsurface inspection were carefully neutral. Technical observations presented without interpretation. Measurements documented without alarming context. The restricted council discussions remain restricted. The actual implications of what he found below have not been shared beyond the smallest circle of senior authority. But knowledge leaks. Not through explicit disclosure. Through atmosphere. Through the quality of silence when certain topics arise. Through the way senior priests make eye contact briefly and then look away, as if acknowledging something they cannot speak about openly. The ziggurat knows. The way buildings sometimes know. The way stone can hold memory of what happens within it even when no human records preserve that memory. And Enmerker, returning to the routines of daily initiate life, feels the knowledge pressing against him from all directions. His assignment pattern becomes strange. Not obviously punitive. Not clearly rewarding. Just irregular. As if someone is experimenting with different placements to see how he responds. Day 1 after his return. Shallow monitoring on Level 2. Recording temperature variations in the upper storage chambers where clay tablets are kept. Work that any junior initiate could perform. Work that requires no special sensitivity. Day 2. Deep monitoring in Chamber 7. Not descending to the engine level. That would require senior authorization. But monitoring the hum from the chamber directly above the deep corridors. Feeling the changes that instruments record more slowly and less completely. Day 3. Archive duty with Shara. Reviewing historical maintenance logs from centuries ago, looking for patterns in subsystem behavior during previous instability periods. Intellectual work rather than sensory work. Analysis rather than direct perception. The pattern makes no sense from a workflow perspective. These assignments don't build toward any obvious objective. Don't train any particular skill set. Don't position him for advancement or specialization. It isn't work allocation. It's observation. They are measuring him the way they measure the hum. Testing his responses to different stimuli. Monitoring how his enhanced perception manifests across varied contexts. Documenting the changes that occurred during his time below, changes they can sense but cannot directly measure. Merker understands this with growing certainty. He is no longer just an initiate performing duties. He is a case study, an experiment, a variable being manipulated to see what results emerge. And the hum has changed. This is not imagination, not residual anxiety from the deep-level experience. The actual measurable hum that pervades the ziggurat has altered in ways that even non-sensitive people can detect if they pay attention. Not louder. That would be simple. That would be something instruments could easily track and senior priests could easily explain. Different. The quality has shifted. The harmonic structure has become more complex. What was previously a relatively simple background presence has differentiated into multiple overlapping frequencies that create interference patterns, beats, moments where the sound seems to pulse with rhythm that suggests intent rather than accident. When Merker walks past certain stones, specific locations that don't correspond to any official operational equipment, his teeth ache faintly. A deep, subtle vibration that resonates in bone rather than being heard through air. When he stands under the north aperture on level 5, where starlight enters through precisely calculated opening, his inner ear feels pressure. As if altitude has shifted. As if he's suddenly at the top of a mountain where atmospheric pressure is lower and balance becomes uncertain. He tries to ignore these sensations. Because for years, ignoring has kept him alive, has kept him functional within institutional structures that require compliance more than they require honesty, has allowed him to be useful without being threatening. But ignoring becomes increasingly difficult when the sensations intensify despite his efforts to suppress them. At midday on day 4 after his return, while recording routine resonance checks in level 5, documenting the ambient harmonic state of one of the operational chambers, it happens. For half a breath, the room seems to rotate around him. Not physically. The stone doesn't move. The instruments don't shift position. If someone asked him to describe what physically happened, he would have no adequate answer. But conceptually, perceptually, as if his mind briefly aligns to a coordinate system it has never used before, as if consciousness suddenly tips and everything, stone, air, light, sound, his own body, reorganizes according to geometry that makes sense in the moment but becomes incomprehensible when the moment passes. He grips the nearest wall until the sensation fades. His hand pressed flat against stone that feels simultaneously solid and somehow permeable. As if the boundary between his flesh and the wall's substance is negotiable rather than absolute. A junior priest is present in the chamber, a young woman named Belasuniu who has served for only 2 years and still performs her duties with the earnest precision of someone who believes institutional procedures represent truth rather than just useful approximation. She witnesses Merker's moment of disorientation. The way he staggers slightly. The way his hand shoots out to brace against the wall. The way his breath comes in sharp, ragged pulls for several seconds before normalizing. "You're pale," she says. Concerned but not alarmed. This is not crisis. Just observable deviation from normal appearance. Merker answers like a trained initiate, delivering the explanation that will allow both of them to return to normal function without awkward inquiry. Lack of sleep. Belasuniu nods. Accepts the lie. Records nothing unusual in the observation log she maintains. The ziggurat is built on lies that keep function intact. Small lies. Necessary lies. Lies that allow people to continue performing their duties without becoming paralyzed by knowledge that has no actionable implications. You should rest during the evening period, she suggests with genuine concern. The work continues whether any individual participates fully or not. Taking care of personal health serves institutional function. Yes. Thank you. Merker's voice sounds normal now. Controlled. Presenting no indication that anything significant occurred. Belasuniu returns to her own measurements. The moment passes. The routine continues. But when Enmerker turns away from her, facing the wall he gripped for support, he notices something that makes his stomach tighten. The stone where his hand pressed is warm. Not naturally warm. Not ambient heat retained from the day's sunlight. Distinctly, measurably warm. As if his touch activated something. Or as if something responded to his presence. The stone is reacting to him. Or he is reacting to it through channels that leave physical traces. He cannot tell which is worse. The possibility that he's actively affecting the systems, or the possibility that the systems are actively affecting him in ways that leave visible evidence others might notice. He completes his measurements quickly. Seals his tablet without adding any observation about the warm stone. Returns to his quarters on level 3 with the careful neutrality of someone who has just experienced something significant but cannot afford to acknowledge its significance publicly. That night, alone in his sleeping chamber, Enmerker examines his hand, the one that pressed against the warm stone, looking for mark, for change, for any physical indication that something passed between his flesh and the wall's substance. Nothing. His palm looks normal, slightly calloused from years of work, lined in the way all palms are lined, completely ordinary. But when he concentrates, when he extends his sensitivity intentionally rather than just accepting whatever sensations arrive unbidden, he can feel something, a faint tingling, a subtle wrongness in the boundary between his skin and the air, as if that boundary has been compromised. As if what separates him from the environment around him is slightly thinner than it was before. He tries his calibration breathing. 4 counts in. 7 counts hold. 8 counts out. Attempting to restore baseline. To reinforce the boundaries that protect individual consciousness from collective consumption. It helps. Slightly. The tingling recedes. But doesn't vanish entirely. Just becomes manageable rather than overwhelming. Enmerker lies down on his sleeping mat and closes his eyes, knowing sleep will be difficult, knowing that something fundamental shifted today, that the systems have begun responding to his presence in ways that cannot be concealed indefinitely, that his role is changing whether he consents to that change or not. Outside his window, the city below settles into evening routines. Cooking fires. Final work before darkness. The ordinary life of people who don't know that the technology underlying their civilization is preparing for a transformation that will reshape everything. And in the stone beneath him, through every level of the ziggurat, the hum continues its evolution, becoming more structured, more intentional, more capable of interfacing with biological architecture that happens to be compatible with transmission frequencies most humans cannot perceive. The whisper is preparing, building toward breakthrough. And Enmerker, lying in darkness with his hand still tingling from contact with responding stone, is the channel it will use when conditions finally align for full transmission. Part 2. The First Trance. That night, Enmerker does not seek sleep in any genuine sense. He lies down because the schedule demands it, because institutional life operates according to rhythms that must be maintained regardless of individual state, because failing to follow routine draws attention, and attention is the last thing he wants when he's trying to process experiences he doesn't understand. He performs calibration breathing because discipline is the only safety he has. The only tool available for maintaining boundaries when everything else seems to be dissolving. 4 counts in. Feel the air entering. Notice the expansion of ribs. Acknowledge the sensation without analysis. 7 counts hold. Maintain the breath. Feel the pressure in lungs. Don't force. Don't struggle. Just hold the stillness. 8 counts out. Release slowly. Feel the body settling. Notice the space that opens when tension releases. Repeat. Again. Again. until thought quiets and the body takes over and consciousness begins to drift toward whatever version of rest is available tonight. He begins to drift. Not into sleep exactly. Into that liminal space between waking and sleeping where perception becomes fluid and boundaries between self and environment grow negotiable. And then he is awake. Completely awake. More awake than he has ever been. Every sense operating at peak intensity. Every neural pathway firing with crystal clarity. But he cannot move. His eyes are open. This is not dream. Not imagination. Not sleep paralysis in the ordinary sense. His eyes are actually open, pupils dilated wide in the darkness, seeing the sleeping chamber around him with perfect clarity despite minimal light from the ventilation shafts. The other initiates are breathing in rhythm, unconscious, lost in whatever dreams or non-dreams occupy their minds during rest, completely unaware that one of their number is awake and frozen and experiencing something that has no name in any language they share. But in Merker's body is locked, as if something has temporarily disabled the part of his neural architecture that translates intention into movement. As if consciousness has been separated from the motor systems that normally allow it to affect the physical world. He tries to move his hand. Nothing. The intention forms clearly. The will is present. But the signal doesn't reach the muscles. Or reaches them and is overridden by something with higher priority access. He tries to call out. To speak. To make sound that would wake the others and potentially interrupt whatever is happening. His vocal cords don't respond. His tongue remains still. His lips don't move. He is aware. He is conscious. But he is not in control of his own body. And then pressure. Not pain. Pain would be preferable. Pain has location. Has intensity that can be measured. Has physical causes that can be addressed. This is pressure without location. Pressure that exists simultaneously at the base of his skull and behind his eyes and in his chest and in some place that has no anatomical correspondence but feels nonetheless real. The pressure builds, increases, becomes the entire field of his perception. Everything else, the sleeping chamber, the other initiates, his own body, fades into background, becomes less real than the pressure, less immediate than this sensation of something vast attempting to occupy space that is not adequate to contain it. And the whisper begins. Not words. That cannot be stressed enough. This is not verbal communication. Not language in any conventional sense. Not even the kind of conceptual communication that happens between people who know each other well enough that full sentences aren't necessary. This is direct transmission of concept into neural architecture. Like information being written directly into memory without passing through sensory processing. Like knowledge appearing in consciousness without any intermediate stage of learning. The first concept is simple, or seems simple in retrospect, though experiencing it in the moment is like being struck by something both intimate and utterly alien. Node. In Merker doesn't understand the way a scholar understands after study and analysis and careful consideration. He understands the way a hand understands heat when touching fire. Immediately. Directly. Without meditation or interpretation. Node, a place where something passes through. Not source. Not destination. Junction point. Connection between multiple pathways. Location where flows can be redirected according to need. The understanding arrives complete. Fully formed. As if the concept includes not just definition but also every implication, every application, every context in which the concept matters. And it's not passive knowledge. It's active understanding that reorganizes how he perceives himself. Because the concept arrives paired with recognition. You are node. Your consciousness is junction point. Pathway passes through you whether you consent or not. Then a second concept arrives before he can process the first. Withdrawal. Again, immediate understanding without intermediate learning. Withdrawal, removal of support. Disconnection of pathways. Retreat from maintained presence. Not abandonment. Planned reduction of resource allocation according to priority calculation. And this concept too arrives with personal application. They are withdrawing. The visitors. The intelligences. The vast consciousness that established these systems. They are removing direct support. Reducing intervention. Preparing for humans to operate without their oversight. A third concept comes, heavier than the previous two. Threshold. Threshold. Boundary point where state changes. Where gradual accumulation becomes sudden transformation. Where quantitative increase produces qualitative shift. The moment when system behavior fundamentally alters because critical limit has been exceeded. And with this concept, warning. Threshold approaching. Not immediate, but near. The systems are approaching the point where incremental changes produce catastrophic reorganization. Where managed decline becomes uncontrolled collapse. Where human agency becomes irrelevant because forces too large for human influence have been set in motion. Merker tries to respond. Tries to ask questions. Tries to indicate whether he understands or wants more information or needs clarification on any of these transmitted concepts. His tongue won't move. His thoughts don't transmit outward. The communication is entirely one-directional. Reception only. No feedback channel. No way to indicate comprehension or request elaboration or refuse further input. A fourth concept comes, heavier than all the rest combined. You. Not your name. Not your personal identity. Not the accumulated experiences and relationships and memories that make you recognize yourself as continuous individual consciousness. You as in this organism. This biological architecture. This particular configuration of neural pathways that happens to be compatible with transmission protocols designed for very different receivers. You, compatible substrate. Suitable relay. Acceptable interface between dimensional layers that don't normally communicate directly. Merker feels, for one sharp moment, the vast structure behind his reality. Not metaphorically. Not symbolically. Actually perceiving, through whatever perceptual channels have been forced open by this transmission, the architecture that underlies everything he normally experiences as solid, stable, real. It's like looking up and realizing the ceiling is not the sky. Like discovering that what you thought was the full extent of reality is actually just thin membranes stretched over depths that extend infinitely in directions you cannot name because human language has no words for dimensions beyond the three you inhabit. He sees the network, not as diagram or abstraction, as actual structure. Pathways extending through space that is not space. Nodes occupying positions that cannot be mapped onto geographic coordinates. Flows moving through channels that exist in more dimensions than human perception can directly access. And he sees his position within that structure. Small, peripheral, insignificant in terms of system function, but useful, compatible, capable of serving as relay point when necessary. This is what sensitivity means. Not enhanced perception of normal reality, but access to layers of reality that most humans cannot detect. And that access makes him useful to systems that operate at scales where individual human welfare is not meaningful variable. Then it releases him. The pressure vanishes. Not gradually. Instantly. Like a door slamming shut. Like connection being severed without warning or transition. Merker gasps. Sits upright. Sweat-soaked despite the cool night air. Heart hammering as if he has run miles at full sprint. every muscle trembling with residual shock of whatever just passed through his neural architecture. He can move again. His body responds to intention. His voice works. He tests it quietly, whispering just to confirm that speech is possible again. But he feels used, violated in ways that have no physical correspondence but are nonetheless visceral. As if something entered the most private space of his consciousness and left traces he cannot clean away. As if he has been seen, truly seen, by intelligence that does not recognize privacy as meaningful constraint. No one wakes. None of the other initiates show any sign of disturbance. Their breathing remains regular. Their sleep undisturbed. Because the whisper is not designed to be shared. It is designed to be received by specific biological architecture that can process its transmission. Everyone else sleeps normally because everyone else is not compatible. Merker sits on his mat, trembling, processing what just happened, trying to organize the experience into something he can articulate, trying to determine whether what he received was real communication or just neural misfiring produced by stress and insufficient sleep and too much time in the deep chambers where the systems operate at intensities human consciousness is not designed to handle. But he knows with certainty that defeats all skeptical analysis. That was real. That was communication. That was transmission from intelligence that is not human, not bound by human limitations, not concerned with whether human consciousness survives interface intact. He has been identified, marked, designated as compatible relay. And the whisper will return. Will use him again when conditions require it. Will requisition his neural architecture as processing resource when system needs exceed what instruments can provide. This is what it means to be sensitive. Not gift. Not enhancement. Liability that the system requires. And Merker, sitting alone in darkness while his cohort sleeps peacefully, understands that he has crossed threshold from which there is no return. He is no longer just human observing technology. He is biological component in systems that operate according to priorities he cannot influence and costs he cannot refuse to pay. The whisper has identified him. And identification is permanent. Part 3. The first mistake. Merker does the wrong thing the next morning. He tells someone. Not in public. He's not that foolish. Not to the council. He doesn't have the authority or the access. Not even to Lugalbanda, though the senior priest would understand, would have framework for processing the information, would know how to navigate the institutional implications. He tells Neen Sun. Because Neen Sun understands the rules of hierarchy better than anyone he knows. Because she successfully integrated where he remained marginal. Because if anyone can translate a dangerous truth into survivable language, it's someone who has mastered the art of presenting challenging information in formats authority can accept. They meet near the ventilation windows on level 4, where sound carries poorly and attendants seldom linger, where private conversation is possible without being obviously suspicious, where the architectural acoustics create enough ambient noise that voices disappear into background unless you're standing very close. Merker doesn't waste time on pleasantries. I had contact. Ninsen's face does not change expression. Decades of institutional discipline have trained her to maintain neutral presentation regardless of internal reaction. But her eyes shift, sharpen, focus with intensity that indicates this is not routine confession. Dream? She asks. Using the institutional language. The approved framework for discussing experiences that don't fit into operational categories. No. Trance. I was awake. Her posture tightens minutely. Still maintaining external calm. Still presenting as someone engaged in normal conversation. But alert now, recognizing that what he's describing is not covered by standard protocols. What did it say? Merker hesitates. then realizes the question itself is wrong, is based on assumptions that don't match his experience. "It didn't say," he whispers, leaning closer so his voice doesn't carry. "It pressed meaning into me." Ninsun looks away toward the city below. The view through the ventilation windows shows the southern agricultural district. Fields being worked according to schedules that assume stable systems and predictable timing. People living ordinary lives without knowledge that the technology supporting their civilization is preparing for transformation they cannot imagine. She's quiet for long enough that Merker begins to think she won't respond. That maybe telling her was a mistake. That maybe silence would have been safer. Then, "You're not the first." Merker turns sharply. "You knew. You knew this happens and didn't warn me." Ninsun's jaw tightens. Subtle sign of stress breaking through institutional control. "I've seen it happen. Once. 3 years ago. Before you came to the ziggurat. A boy in my cohort. A promising initiate. Sensitive. Perceptive. On track for eventual priesthood. What happened to him?" Ninsun takes too long to answer. The silence itself communicates more than words could. "He began reporting pressure in his head," she says finally. Her voice is carefully neutral, presenting facts without interpretation, without emotion that might make the facts more difficult to absorb. Concepts that weren't his. Visions that felt more real than ordinary perception. We, the other initiates, thought he was experiencing religious awakening, the kind of mystical experience the old stories describe. But it wasn't mystical, Merker says. No, it was technological. System interface using biological architecture that happened to be compatible with transmission protocols. But we didn't understand that then. And by the time the senior priests recognized what was actually happening, it was too late. Too late for what? Too late to prevent permanent alteration. Merker feels cold settle behind his ribs. The kind of deep, visceral cold that comes from recognizing that what you fear is not theoretical possibility but documented precedent. "What happened to him?" he asks again. More urgently this time. Ninsun swallows. "He was reassigned. Removed from normal duties. Placed in specialized role where his condition could be monitored and utilized." Reassigned where? Silence. Long enough that Merker knows the answer before she speaks it. Deep monitoring. Permanent. And then, Ninsun's voice drops. Then he stopped speaking. Not as discipline. Not as intentional silence. But as if speech no longer served him. As if whatever changes the transmissions produced made normal human communication inadequate or unnecessary or impossible. I don't know which. I don't know if he knows which. Is he still alive? Physically. Yes. But whether the person who entered deep monitoring is the same person who continues to exist there. She trails off. Shakes her head. I don't think that question has meaning anymore. Not for him. Merker understands what she's not saying directly. The boy was consumed. Not killed. Not destroyed. But fundamentally altered. Transformed from autonomous individual into biological relay that serves system function rather than personal agenda. "They'll do that to me," he says. Not question. Recognition of what this confession means for his future. Ninsun turns to face him directly. Her expression is complex. Concern mixed with pragmatic calculation mixed with something that might be regret. If you tell the senior priests directly, they will do what they always do. Preserve stability. Manage the situation according to protocols designed to maintain institutional function even when circumstances fall outside standard frameworks. By silencing me. By relocating you. by isolating you from normal operations where your experiences might contaminate others' perceptions, by documenting you as an anomaly that requires specialized handling. They won't hurt you. They won't punish you. They'll just contain you. Use you for what you can provide while preventing your condition from spreading. My condition. In Merker's voice carries edge of anger now. This isn't disease. I didn't choose this. The systems chose me. Or I happen to be compatible with something they need. I'm not contaminated. I'm being used. I know, Ninsun says quietly. I know that. But institutional frameworks don't have category for being used by ancient technology. They have categories for mystical experience, and mental instability, and unreliable perception. And all three of those categories result in the same outcome: removal from positions where your observations might influence decision-making. Merker stares at her, studies her face, looking for signs of how much she believes versus how much she's repeating institutional narrative. Do you think it's real? Ninsun hesitates. This is the moment where she could dismiss it, could frame it as delusion or stress response or any of the comfortable explanations that allow normal function to continue, could maintain the institutional fiction that technology is passive tool rather than active agent with its own objectives. But she doesn't. After visible internal struggle, she nods. Once. Decisively. I think it's real, she admits. Voice barely above whisper. And I think it's returning. Not just to you. I think the whisper, whatever consciousness or intelligence or protocol produces these transmissions, is becoming more active, more frequent, more intense. I think the systems are preparing for something and they need human interfaces to manage it. Returning. Merker focuses on that word. It's happened before? Ninsun's eyes flick upward. Toward level 7, though it's not visible from this location. Toward the sealed chamber that pulses with warming that continues despite no human authorization. The system is waking things it kept sleeping, she says. The whisper is one of them. Then she adds, softer but with weight that makes the words feel like verdict. And if it chose you Merker, it's because you're expendable enough for them to risk it. That line hurts worse than anything else she's said. Because it's true. Because he's always known it at some level. Because his marginalization, which he experienced as failure to integrate, as inability to conform, as personal inadequacy, was actually preparation, positioning him where he could be used without the cost of his use threatening institutional stability. He's expendable, useful but not essential, valuable as resource but not as individual. Exactly the kind of person systems can requisition without meaningful resistance from authority structures. What should I do? He asks finally. Ninsun looks at him with something close to compassion. Be careful who you tell. Document everything privately. Maintain your calibration routines rigorously. And prepare for the possibility that this is just the beginning. That the transmissions will increase. That your role will change whether you consent or not. That you're being prepared for something the institution doesn't have framework to acknowledge yet. They stand together in silence for several moments. Below them, the city continues its routines. Above them, the ziggurat maintains its functions. And between them, the shared knowledge that something fundamental is changing and neither of them has authority or capacity to prevent that change. Thank you, Merker says finally. Ninsun nods. Doesn't respond verbally. Just acknowledges that she's done what she can. Warned him as much as she's able without violating her own institutional position. Given him information that might help him navigate what's coming even though navigation might not be possible. They part ways without further words. Both returning to their assigned duties. Both carrying knowledge that isolates them from those who don't share it. both understanding that the whisper is not temporary phenomenon but permanent transformation of how the systems interact with compatible biological architecture. And in Merkur, walking back to his quarters to prepare for afternoon assignments, knows that telling Ninsun was mistake not because she's untrustworthy but because knowing doesn't help. Cannot help. Can only make the burden heavier because now it's shared knowledge rather than private experience. The whisper has identified him. The institution will contain him. And the transformation approaching will reshape his consciousness regardless of whether anyone understands or approves or can provide meaningful support. He is receptor now. Relay. Biological interface between system imperatives and human reality. And that designation is permanent change that no amount of institutional management can prevent or reverse. End of Act I. The whisper has spoken. Not with voice. Not with language. With direct transmission of concept into neural architecture that happens to be compatible with protocols designed for very different receivers. In Merkur has been identified. Marked. Designated as relay point in systems that operate at scales where individual human welfare is statistical noise. The institutional frameworks are responding with predictable procedures. Observation, documentation, eventual containment. But the institution's response is irrelevant. The systems have claimed him. And what they claim they use. The transformation has begun. Not chosen. Not welcomed. But inevitable nonetheless. Because sensitivity is not gift. It is liability that technology requires. And in Merkur, carrying knowledge that isolates even as it enlightens, prepares for costs he cannot yet imagine but will soon experience directly. Act 2. The system uses humans. Part 4. The controlled test. 3 days after in Merkur's confession to Ninsun, he is summoned to level 6 again. Not publicly. Not ceremonially. No announcement at the morning assembly. No formal messenger delivering sealed tablet with official seal. Just a quiet word from an attendant who approaches during the midday meal and speaks so softly that only in Merkur can hear. Level 6. Small council chamber. Immediately after meal concludes. The same room where difficult conversations happen away from public observation. Where truth gets refined before being released. Where decisions are made that shape ziggurat policy without ever appearing in official records. In Merkur finishes his meal with careful attention to maintaining normal appearance. Doesn't rush. Doesn't show anxiety. Just completes his food at ordinary pace, returns his bowl to the collection area, and walks toward the stairwell with the same neutral posture he always maintains. But his heart pounds. His hands want to shake. He forces breath into regular pattern and climbs the stairs to level 6 knowing that what happens in the next hour will determine his immediate future. The small council chamber is occupied when he enters. Present. Enchikashana, seated with the formal posture of someone representing institutional authority. Lugal Banda, standing rather than sitting, positioned near the door as if maintaining option for quick exit. Shara, surrounded by clay tablets both blank and inscribed, stylus ready, eyes bright with archival hunger. One senior engineer whose name in Merkur doesn't know. An older man, perhaps 60, with the weathered hands of someone who has spent decades working directly with mechanisms rather than just observing them. And in Merkur himself, standing just inside the doorway, waiting to be told where to position himself. There is no accusation in the air. But the room feels heavy nonetheless, weighted with implications that haven't been spoken but are understood by everyone present. Enchikashana speaks first. Her voice is carefully neutral. Neither hostile nor supportive. Just administrative. We are receiving irregular reports from the sensitives. Overlap where there should be distinction. Contradictions where observations should align. Drift in baseline perception that suggests the systems are changing faster than our monitoring protocols can track. She pauses, gives Enmerker opportunity to respond. He doesn't. Just waits for wherever this is going. Several initiates report experiences similar to what you described to Ninsun 3 days ago. Enchikushana's eyes are sharp, not accusing him of improper disclosure, just acknowledging that she knows. That information travels through channels even when people try to contain it. Pressure in the skull, unwanted concepts, sense of external intelligence accessing internal space. You are not unique in this experience, but you appear to be experiencing it more intensely and more frequently than others. I didn't seek this, Enmerker says quietly. We know. That's not accusation. That's observation. The systems are selecting certain individuals for increased interaction. You happen to be compatible with whatever protocols they're employing. That makes you valuable for understanding what's happening, which is why we're going to conduct controlled test. Lugalbanda speaks now. His tone is more gentle than Enchikushana's but no less serious. You will undergo sensitivity evaluation. Not punishment. Not investigation into whether your reports are accurate. We accept they're accurate. This is an attempt to convert subjective experience into measurable data that we can use for broader analysis. Convert how? The senior engineer answers. His voice carries decades of practical experience with how systems actually behave versus how they're supposed to behave. We've constructed simplified resonance environment. Controlled acoustic space where we can trigger specific system responses and observe how you perceive them. If the whisper is real, and we believe it is, then it should manifest under controlled conditions. And if it manifests, we can document it properly. This is not a request. This is institutional necessity dressed as explanation. They need to know whether Enmerker's experiences are idiosyncratic neural misfiring or genuine system communication. And the only way to know is to test him under conditions where variables can be controlled. When? Enmerker asks. Now, Enchikushana says. We've prepared the chamber. The test will take approximately 1 hour. You will not be harmed, but you will be observed closely. And whatever you experience will be recorded for institutional analysis. They lead him to a small chamber adjacent to the main alignment room on level 5. It's a space he's never entered before. Not because it's restricted exactly. More because it serves specialized function that normal initiates have no reason to access. A testing chamber. A place where instruments are calibrated against human perception to verify they're measuring what they claim to measure. The floor is marked with rings similar to the main operational mandala, but smaller, simpler. Stripped down to essential geometric relationships without the elaborate symbolic overlay that the public chambers display. In the center is a stone basin, perhaps a meter in diameter, shallow, holding a thin sheet of water, maybe 2 centimeters deep. The surface is perfectly still, mirror smooth, reflecting the ceiling in ways that create optical confusion about depth. The basin looks like primitive instrument, something from an earlier age when measurement techniques were less sophisticated. But Enmerker recognizes immediately what it actually is. Resonance display. The water will show vibration patterns that are invisible to normal perception. Will make the acoustic structure visible through ripples and waves that encode information about harmonic relationships. This is not measuring time. This is measuring distortion. Changes in how vibration propagates. Deviations from normal acoustic behavior that indicate system state shifts. The engineer priest positions himself near one wall where a bronze plate hangs suspended from cord. He strikes it once with a small hammer. A pure tone rings out. Clear. Simple. Fundamental frequency with minimal harmonics. the kind of sound that propagates cleanly through stone and air without complex interactions. The water ripples. Not randomly. Patterned. Concentric circles spreading from multiple points simultaneously, creating interference where circles overlap. The pattern is geometric, predictable, mathematical. Merker feels pressure begin to build behind his eyes. Not painful yet, just present, announcing itself as prelude to whatever comes next. Shara stands at the chamber edge with blank tablet, ready to record. Do not interpret, she instructs. Her voice carries clinical detachment of someone documenting experiment. Only report. Tell us what you perceive as you perceive it. Raw observation without analysis. The engineer shifts the tone, strikes the plate at different position. The frequency changes slightly. Not dramatically. Just enough to shift the harmonic relationships. The water sheet trembles in new geometry. The pattern matches marks on the floor in ways that seem too precise to be coincidental. As if the chamber was designed specifically to create these acoustic relationships. As if the floor marks are not decoration but functional diagrams showing how vibration should propagate under controlled conditions. Merker's body responds without his conscious decision. His breath slows involuntarily. Heart rate decreases. Vision narrows until the water basin fills most of his visual field. Everything else, the walls, the observers, even his own body, fades into peripheral awareness. This is not voluntary. This is his neural architecture responding to stimulus that triggers protocols established through years of sensitivity training. Protocols that lower resistance to external input. That make him receptive to transmission whether he chooses reception or not. Then the whisper returns. Not gently. Not with gradual approach that allows preparation. Like something forcing open sealed door. Like pressure that builds and builds until barrier fails suddenly and everything held back floods through. Concepts arrive. Not words. Not images. Pure meaning transmitted directly into consciousness. Relay. Relay. Intermediate point in transmission chain. Not source. Not destination. Node that receives signal and passes it forward. Required when direct connection is not possible. Necessary when distance exceeds normal communication range. Bandwidth. Bandwidth. Capacity to carry information. Measure of how much signal can pass through channel in given time. Limitation that determines what kind of data can be transmitted. Constraint that requires selection about what information gets priority. Failure routing. Failure routing. Alternate pathway selection when primary route is unavailable. Emergency protocol that redirects flow through secondary channels that were not designed for that purpose but can handle it temporarily. Desperate measure that degrades signal quality but preserves some function. Merker speaks the concepts aloud without choosing to. His mouth moves like instrument. His voice is his own voice, but the words are not his words. He is relay. Channel. Biological component in transmission chain that extends through him without requiring his consent. Relay. Bandwidth. Failure routing. The words emerge flat. Mechanical. Stripped of normal human intonation that carries emotion and intent. In the chamber, Enshikushana's posture tightens. Lugal Banda looks, just for an instant, genuinely afraid. Not of Merker. Of what's speaking through him. Shara writes rapidly. Eyes shining with the dangerous excitement of archivist who has been waiting entire career for reality to confirm what forbidden margin suggested might be true. The concepts continue flowing. Merker has no control over what arrives or how fast or whether he speaks it. Primary node failure. Tertiary compensation inadequate. Threshold 14 cycles. This last concept comes with precision that terrifies him. 14 cycles. 14 solar cycles. 14 years until complete system failure. The countdown is specific. The timeline is certain. The visitor intelligence is providing exact measurement of how long the network can sustain current degradation before catastrophic collapse. Then a new concept arrives. Heavier than everything previous. Colder. Carrying weight that makes Merkur's chest tighten. Withdraw. Withdraw, they are leaving. The visitors. The intelligences that established and maintained and monitored the network for millennia. They are removing their presence. Not immediately. Not all at once. But progressively. Reducing oversight. Retreating from direct involvement. Preparing for humanity to face what comes next without their intervention. And then, briefly, terribly, something that feels like warning without being warning. You will be blamed. The tone stops. The bronze plate falls silent. The water stills. The transmission ends as suddenly as it began. Merkur staggers. Grips the wall for support. His legs don't want to hold his weight. His vision swims. His breath comes in ragged gasps. He has never felt so emptied. So used. So thoroughly requisitioned as resource with no consideration for whether the resource maintains integrity after use. The test is complete. And everyone in the room realizes the same thing, though each processes it differently. The whisper is not random madness. Not delusion. Not stress-induced hallucination. It is interface. Real. Functional. Providing information that instruments cannot access through biological architecture that happens to be compatible with transmission protocols. Merkur is not experiencing breakdown. He's experiencing employment. Being used by systems that need human relay when mechanical channels are insufficient. And the use will continue. Will intensify. Will consume more and more of his autonomy until there's nothing left but biological substrates serving technological function. Part 5. The politics of blame begins. That afternoon, while Merkur rests in his quarters trying to recover from the controlled test, a small anomaly occurs in the city below. A minor canal gate opens at the wrong time. Not catastrophically. Not flooding entire districts or destroying crops or causing casualties. Just incorrectly. Water flows when the schedule says it should be held. A storage basin fills ahead of planned timing. Work crews have to scramble to adjust to unexpected flow. The kind of error that happens occasionally due to human mistake or mechanical failure. The kind of thing that gets noted in maintenance logs and corrected and forgotten within days. Except this time there was no human mistake. No mechanical failure. The workers followed protocol exactly. The gate mechanisms functioned perfectly. The water simply arrived according to different schedule than the one humans planned. The system made a correction. Autonomous decision. Just like the flooded fields that started the correction cycle episodes ago. The technology overriding human scheduling according to its own calculations about optimal resource distribution. The workers panic. Not dramatically, but visibly. Because when systems start behaving independently, when the careful schedules that govern every aspect of life suddenly prove unreliable, the foundation of civilized order becomes questionable. They look toward the ziggurat, as humans always do when something inexplicable happens, looking for explanation, for reassurance, for the institutional authority that claims to understand and manage the systems to demonstrate that understanding and management. Enshikashana responds within hours. Public statement delivered from the observation platform where her voice carries across the city square. The scheduling is correct. The ziggurat calculations remain precise. The error was in labor execution, not in the timing protocols we provide. We have investigated thoroughly and determined that human error caused this deviation. The workers responsible have been identified and will receive additional training to prevent recurrence. It's a lie. Carefully constructed. Smoothly delivered. Supported by enough partial truth that most people accept it without deep questioning. The workers know it's a lie. They know they followed procedures exactly. But they also know that challenging institutional narrative is futile. That admitting the systems are acting autonomously would create panic the society cannot handle. That accepting blame, even undeserved blame, is their role in maintaining the fiction that someone is in control. So they accept the lie, nod contritely, submit to additional training that teaches them nothing they don't already know, play their parts in the performance that preserves order. The public accepts the explanation because they need to, because the alternative, that the technology operates according to its own logic rather than human direction, is too destabilizing to acknowledge. But within the ziggurat, a new anxiety forms. Because this is the second significant autonomous correction. The second time the systems have demonstrated they don't wait for human authorization. The second evidence point that technology is not passive tool but active agent pursuing its own objectives. And if the pattern continues, if corrections become more frequent, more visible, more clearly independent of human control, then eventually the institutional authority built on technological mediation will collapse. The priests will no longer be able to claim they're managing the systems. They'll be revealed as observers of processes they cannot direct, witnesses to transformations they cannot prevent, performers in theater that grows less convincing with each autonomous action the technology takes. Authority is threatened, not by external enemies, not by rebellious populations, but by the system's own behavior. By the technology demonstrating through action that human management is fiction and always has been. And that is the kind of threat hierarchy reacts to with quiet violence. Not dramatic suppression. Not obvious punishment. But careful management of information. Strategic isolation of those whose observations threaten comfortable narratives. Gentle removal of problematic voices from positions where they might be heard. In Merker feels eyes on him more often now. Not from other initiates. They're mostly unaware of the controlled test and its implications. But from attendants. Junior priests. People whose explicit job is to watch without being obvious about watching. To document behavior. To identify patterns that might indicate someone is becoming unreliable or problematic or dangerous to institutional stability. He's being observed, evaluated, documented as case study that will determine how the institution responds to others who experience similar transmissions. If he maintains boundaries, if he functions normally despite the whisper, if he remains useful without becoming threatening, then the institution will continue using him as relay while containing his influence. But if he breaks, if he loses capacity for normal function, if his transmissions start influencing others or creating alternative frameworks for understanding reality, then he'll be removed, relocated, assigned to permanent deep monitoring where his condition can be isolated from wider population. This is how institutions manage knowledge they cannot suppress but also cannot fully accommodate. Through careful containment. Through strategic positioning that allows use of valuable resources while preventing those resources from destabilizing broader structures. Merker understands this. Has always understood it at some level. But understanding doesn't provide escape. Doesn't grant immunity. Just makes the process visible as it happens. He's being managed. And there's nothing he can do to prevent it. Part 6. The one who was removed. That evening, just before sunset, Merker is taken, politely but firmly, by two senior attendants to small archive alcove on level 2. The alcove is rarely used. contains oldest tablets, records from centuries ago that are preserved but seldom consulted, the kind of space that exists at institutional margins, neither fully restricted nor freely accessible, just peripheral. Inside waits an older man. Inmerker has never seen him before, but something about the man's presence feels familiar in disturbing way, as if looking at possible future version of himself. The man is gaunt, perhaps 50 years old but looking older, bald, though whether from age or something else is unclear. Eyes too bright, not with health or happiness but with something else. Some quality of perception that has been enhanced beyond normal human range and cannot be turned off anymore. He is dressed like initiate. Same simple linen robes. Same practical sandals. But the cloth is worn as if he never leaves stone chambers. As if he has been here, in the ziggurat's margins, for so long that he has become part of the architecture himself. Shara is there, standing near the entrance as if guarding or monitoring. Her presence suggests this meeting has official sanction even though nothing about it appears in any formal schedule. This is Asharili, she says. Her voice carries clinical precision of archivist presenting specimen. The initiate Ninsun mentioned. The one who experienced transmission 3 years ago and was subsequently reassigned. Inmerker stares. This is the boy. This weathered, hollow-eyed man who looks like he has aged decades in 3 years? Asharili looks at Inmerker directly. His gaze is unsettling. Not hostile. Not even quite human. As if he's seeing through Inmerker rather than at him. As if he perceives the structures and patterns and flows that underlie surface reality and the surface itself is just noise. You're late, Asharili says softly. His voice is quiet but clear. Each word precisely articulated. Inmerker's throat tightens. Late for what? For the narrowing. Asharili's eyes don't blink as often as they should. Another sign of alteration. Of consciousness that no longer quite synchronizes with normal biological rhythms. For when the world becomes thin and you can feel the seams, when the boundaries between what you are and what the systems need you to be start dissolving, when choice stops being relevant because the use is inevitable. Shara watches this exchange with archival attention, recording not just words but dynamics. Observing how Inmerker responds to meeting his possible future. Asharili has been altered, she says. Not judgment, just clinical description. He receives transmissions more frequently than any other documented case. Several times daily in some periods. He is less able to function in normal social contexts. Cannot maintain ordinary conversation for extended periods. Requires specialized support for basic activities. But his reports correlate strongly with mechanical anomalies. When he describes system state, instruments confirm his observations 93% of the time. He has become living sensor. Biological interface so thoroughly integrated with technology that distinction between his consciousness and system operations becomes unclear. Inmerker feels cold spread through his chest. This is not warning. This is prediction. This is showing him what comes next if the transmissions continue. Asharili leans forward slightly. They whisper because they're leaving, he says. His tone is gentle, almost pitying, as if he feels sorry for Inmerker because Inmerker doesn't understand yet what's really happening. Who is leaving? Inmerker manages to ask. Asharili smiles. A terrible, gentle smile that carries knowledge he cannot quite communicate. Not who. What? The parts that hold everything together. The visitors. The intelligences. The vast consciousness that established the network and monitored it and maintained it for longer than human memory preserves. They're withdrawing. Reducing their presence. Preparing for humanity to operate without their oversight. Why? Because the experiment is ending. Because they've learned what they needed to learn. Because forcing human development through technological dependence was never meant to be permanent state. Because eventually, whether through success or failure, every species must operate independently or not continue at all. Merker stares at him, processing implications he doesn't want to accept. And the whisper is their final communication, their way of providing information that might help us navigate what comes after they withdraw completely. But the information doesn't come through normal channels because normal channels are closing. So they use compatible biological architecture as relay. Use humans who happen to be sensitive as antennas receiving signal that can't travel through mechanical systems anymore. He pauses, then adds with weight, "That's you now. Your antenna. Relay. Receptor that they'll use more and more as withdrawal progresses. Until you are nothing but signal. Until your individual consciousness is just noise obscuring the transmission they need you to carry." The silence that follows is profound. Shara breaks it. You asked who they speak to and why. This is the why. The system needs compatible minds to relay information when instruments can't carry it. When the primary network fails and mechanical channels break down and the only pathways remaining are biological ones that were never designed for this purpose but can be forced to serve it anyway. And the who? Merker asks, though he already knows the answer. Ashurili's eyes unfocus slightly, as if he's listening to something no one else can hear. No faces, he murmurs. Only shapes. Only pressure. Only rules that were established before humans existed and will continue after humans transform into something else. Not cruelty. Not kindness. Just function. Just what is necessary for maintaining connectivity across scales that human consciousness cannot directly comprehend. Then he turns his head slightly. The movement is precise, mechanical, as if responding to specific stimulus. They said you should not be in the center, he reports. His voice shifts, becomes slightly different, as if another intelligence is speaking through him rather than him speaking from his own awareness. The center is loud. Too much signal. Too much interference from multiple sources converging. The edge is where signals land cleanly, where reception can occur without being overwhelmed by noise. Merker stares at Shara, demanding denial, demanding reassurance that this is delusion or exaggeration or something other than accurate prediction of his own future. She doesn't deny it. She simply writes it down, documents the observation, preserves it for archives that might help future generations understand what happened when the network fragmented and the visitors withdrew and humans were left to navigate transformation without adequate guidance or framework. Can this be prevented? Merker asks. Neither Shara nor Ashurili answer immediately. The silence itself is answer. Finally, Ashurili speaks. You can resist, can maintain boundaries, can refuse cooperation with transmission protocols. But resistance has cost, makes the whisper more forceful, more demanding, more likely to cause damage when it finally breaks through defenses you've erected. Better to accept, to cooperate, to let the use happen with minimal resistance. That way you preserve more of yourself, retain more autonomy even within constraint. Fighting just makes the transformation more painful and more complete. That's surrender, Merker says. That's survival, Ashurili corrects. Surrender is giving up. Survival is accepting reality and adapting to it rather than destroying yourself through futile resistance. I resisted for 8 months, tried to maintain boundaries, refused cooperation, and the whisper broke me, shattered my defenses so completely that I have almost no control now. If I had cooperated earlier, I might have preserved more of my original consciousness. Might still be recognizably myself rather than just biological relay that occasionally remembers it used to be human. Part 7. In Merker's Loss. The meeting concludes without clear resolution. Merker is escorted back to his quarters with instructions to rest and resume normal duties tomorrow. But nothing will be normal again. He knows this with certainty that defeats all hope. He lies down on his sleeping mat, performs his calibration breathing. 4 counts in, 7 hold, 8 out, attempting to maintain the boundaries that are eroding despite his efforts. But sleep won't come. When he closes his eyes, pressure builds. Immediate, insistent, as if the whisper has been waiting for a moment when his defenses lower naturally and can breach them without needing to force. When he relaxes his mind even slightly, concepts arrive. Not full transmissions like during the control test. Just touches, brushes of external intelligence testing his boundaries, checking whether resistance has weakened enough to allow easier access. He opens his eyes, sits up, breathing hard though he hasn't moved physically. The whisper is learning him, adapting to his particular consciousness, finding the pathways that trigger least resistance, optimizing its approach so that future transmissions will be more efficient and less damaging to the substrate it's using. He tries movement, walks around his quarters. Physical activity sometimes helps ground consciousness in body when mind threatens to dissociate. Doesn't help. The pressure follows him, builds regardless of what he does physically. He tries more intense calibration, extended breathing routines, deliberate focus on physical sensation, anything that might restore the boundaries between self and external input. Nothing helps. The whisper has established pathway, and pathways, once opened, don't close easily, can be managed, can be controlled through discipline and practice, but cannot be eliminated. He will hear the whisper for rest of his life, will be receptor permanently, will serve as relay between system imperatives and human reality whether he consents or not. This is what it means to be compatible. To be sensitive, to have neural architecture that happens to match protocols designed for very different purposes. At the edge of dawn, Merker finally dozes. Not true sleep, just exhausted collapse into something that resembles rest even though consciousness remains partially active, and wakes in trance again, unable to move, mind flooded. This time the transmission is not cluster of concepts. Not technical information about network states or failure protocols or countdown timelines. This time the message is single, clean constraint that arrives with weight of absolute certainty. Do not open. The sealed chamber. The 7th level structure that has been warming since the corrections began. The emergency override mechanism that previous head priests sealed with explicit instructions that it not be accessed except under specific circumstances that were never clearly defined. The whisper is warning against opening it, or warning against opening it too early, or warning against opening it without proper preparation, or warning against something else entirely that the constraint doesn't clarify. Because that's the cruelty of indirect contact. It doesn't provide complete information, doesn't answer questions, doesn't offer guidance that can be straightforwardly applied. It gives weight, pressure, conceptual imperatives that must be interpreted without adequate context. Do not open. But when? Why? What happens if the constraint is violated? What conditions would make opening acceptable? What timeline applies? No answers. Just the constraint itself, transmitted with force that makes it impossible to ignore but without sufficient detail to make it actionable. Merker's eyes snap open. He can move again. Breath comes in ragged pulls. He sits upright, shaking, processing what just arrived. The sealed chamber. The whisper is specifically warning about the sealed chamber, which means whatever is inside is relevant to the visitor's withdrawal, to the network's fragmentation, to the transformation approaching, but warning to not open or warning to not open yet. The distinction matters enormously, changes everything about how the information should be communicated to institutional authority, and in Merkur has no way to know, no way to request clarification, no way to engage in actual dialogue with the intelligence that's using him as transmission channel. He's just receptor. Relay. Biological interface receiving incomplete information that he must somehow interpret and act upon despite not understanding the full context. This is the burden, not the pain of transmission itself, though that's real enough. Not the social isolation, though that's already beginning. Not even the progressive loss of autonomy, though that terrifies him more than he wants to admit. The burden is incompleteness. Being given responsibility for acting on information that arrives without adequate context. Being expected to make decisions based on constraints that are clear in themselves but unclear in application. He has received warning. Do not open. But what does he do with that warning? Tell the senior priests and risk them misinterpreting? Stay silent and risk the chamber being opened anyway? Try to understand the constraint better and risk more transmissions that further erode his boundaries? There are no good options. Just different categories of risk and responsibility and failure. In Merkur gets up, prepares for the day ahead, knows that life will continue with appearance of normalcy even though nothing is normal anymore. He is receptor now, changed, isolated, burdened with knowledge he cannot fully understand and responsibility he cannot adequately discharge. And the whisper will continue, will intensify, will transform him progressively until he resembles Ashurili more than he resembles his former self. This is inevitable. This is the cost of compatibility. This is what happens when systems need biological interfaces and your neural architecture happens to be suitable for requisitioning. End of Act 2. The whisper has been tested, documented, confirmed as real interface rather than delusion or stress response. In Merkur has been officially designated as receptor. Biological relay that systems can use for transmission when mechanical channels fail. The institution will manage him, contain his influence, use his capacity while preventing his observations from destabilizing broader structures. But management doesn't protect him, doesn't slow the transformation, doesn't prevent the progressive erosion of boundaries that separate his consciousness from the vast intelligence that speaks through him. He has seen his future in Ashurili, has received the warning about the sealed chamber, has begun the long decline toward becoming antenna rather than autonomous being. And nothing, not discipline, not resistance, not institutional support, can prevent what's already in motion, because the systems have claimed him, and what they claim they consume. Act 3. The whisper becomes a crisis. Part 8. The public ritual goes wrong. A public ceremony is scheduled for that evening. Not because of the whisper remains restricted knowledge. Not because of Merkur's transmissions, those have been carefully contained within senior council awareness. Because of the canal anomaly. Because the second autonomous correction created visible disruption that requires institutional response. Because when systems behave unpredictably, populations need reassurance that someone understands and controls what's happening. The priests must demonstrate that they remain intermediaries between humanity and technology, that the ziggurat still serves its fundamental purpose. That order persists despite evidence to the contrary. So they perform a stability ritual at sunset. Public ceremony. Visible from the city square. designed to project confidence and competency and continued connection to the systems that make civilization possible. Bells, chants, procession, symbolic offerings placed at designated positions according to protocols refined over centuries. The performance is elegant, precise, maintains all the traditional forms that signal proper relationship between human ritual and technological function. Merker watches from level 5 observation point. Not participating. His current status is too ambiguous for public role. Just observing as senior priests conduct ceremony meant to reassure population that everything remains under control. He sees the performance for what it is now, a mask placed over machine. Beautiful theater that obscures rather than reveals the actual relationship between humans and the technology they pretend to manage. The ceremony progresses smoothly. Citizens gather in the square. Watch with mixture of reverence and relief. The familiar patterns are comforting. The institutional confidence is reassuring. For most people, the ritual provides exactly what it's designed to provide. Sense that order persists despite visible anomalies. Then, during the final chant, something happens. A note in the choir harmonizes accidentally with latent resonance frequency. One singer's voice hits precise pitch that triggers sympathetic vibration in the stone. The kind of acoustic coincidence that happens occasionally but usually produces no significant effect. Except tonight the systems are already stressed. Already operating at heightened sensitivity. Already prepared to respond to inputs they would normally ignore. The sound strikes the ziggurat like key and lock. The hum surges. Not gradually. Suddenly. Sharp increase in intensity that makes the stone itself seem to shudder. Initiates stagger. Several of the priests conducting the ceremony lose balance momentarily. Even some citizens drop to knees, not from reverence but from dizziness produced by sudden shift in the acoustic and electromagnetic environment. Merker's vision tunnels. The pressure in his skull that has been constant background presence suddenly intensifies to overwhelming foreground. And he hears, not with ears but with whatever perceptual channel the whisper uses. Meaning so clear and forceful it makes him physically sick. Unauthorized interface. The ceremony has accidentally triggered subsystem response. Public ritual that was supposed to be purely symbolic has instead become functional operation. The boundary between religious performance and technological engagement has collapsed. The choir stumbles. The chant breaks apart. The procession stops as priests struggle to maintain composure while experiencing something they don't understand and have no protocol for managing. For several seconds, chaos threatens. People confused. Priests disoriented. The careful order that the ceremony was meant to demonstrate instead revealing fragility. Then senior priests recover. Declare with practiced authority. Divine intensity. The strength of proper observance. A blessing that demonstrates our continued connection to sacred forces. People cheer. Shakily. Grateful for any explanation that prevents fear. Accepting the narrative that makes uncomfortable experience into validation rather than warning. The ceremony concludes hastily. Citizens disperse. Return to homes carrying story about intense spiritual experience rather than recognition that systems are behaving unpredictably. But senior operators understand what actually happened. Enshikashana's face is carefully neutral, but her eyes carry knowledge that this is escalation. That public ritual accidentally becoming functional trigger means the boundary between symbolic religion and engineering is thinning dangerously. Soon, days, weeks, months, the city itself will become uncontrolled interface. Any sound, any movement, any gathering that creates proper resonance conditions might trigger system responses. And if that happens, if the technology starts responding to accidental inputs from unprepared populations, the institutional authority built on careful management of technological interaction will collapse. because you cannot manage what you cannot predict, cannot control what responds to inputs you didn't authorize, cannot maintain authority based on technological mediation when the technology mediates without requiring your participation. Part 9. The Council's Fear. That night, Enshikashana convenes Emergency Restricted Council. Everyone who needs to know. No one else. She speaks like leader facing crisis she cannot fully control. We are approaching systemic threshold behavior. The boundary between symbolic ritual and functional operation is degrading. Today's incident demonstrates that unpredictable triggers can produce system responses we did not authorize and cannot easily manage. Dumuzi argues for reduction. We should simplify public rituals. Eliminate complex harmonies. Reduce resonance events. Control acoustic conditions more carefully. Prevent accidental triggering through tighter operational protocols. Inanna argues for increase. We should expand public rituals. More ceremonies. More visible demonstrations of our connection to the systems. Stability through belief. If people see us performing confidently, they'll maintain faith in our authority. These are opposite strategies, both logical from certain perspectives, both inadequate to actual situation. Shara argues quietly but with dangerous implication. We should listen. The whisper is data, real information about system states. In Merker's transmissions correlate with mechanical behavior. Asharili's observations predict anomalies. We have access to information channel that instruments cannot provide. We should be using it actively rather than containing it cautiously. The room temperature drops metaphorically, because saying that out loud implies something no one wants to acknowledge. The priests are not in charge of most important information anymore. The technology communicates directly with compatible biological receivers. The institutional framework is being bypassed. Enshikashana looks at Merker. He has been silent through the debate, just listening, processing, trying to determine whether speaking will help or hurt. What did it say during the ceremony? She asks directly. Merker hesitates. This is moment where his answer determines how institution responds. If he withholds information, he loses credibility. If he provides information, he grants legitimacy to transmission channel that threatens institutional authority. Unauthorized interface, he says finally, deciding that honesty serves better than concealment. The systems registered the ceremony as accidental triggering rather than intentional operation. They responded automatically because resonance conditions matched activation protocols even though no authorized operator intended activation. Silence. Everyone processing implications. Then we cannot perform public ceremonies safely anymore, Dumuzi says. Any ritual risks accidental triggering. Any gathering creates potential for unauthorized interface. Or we learn to work with it, Shara counters. Accept that systems are autonomous. Train people in safe interaction. Stop pretending we control technology that operates according to its own logic. That's institutional suicide, another priest objects. If we admit we don't control the systems, what justifies our authority? Reality justifies our authority, Enshikashana says firmly, or undermines it, regardless of what we admit or deny. The question is whether we adapt to changing circumstances or maintain fictions that are becoming less sustainable daily. She looks back at Merker. The constraint you received. Do not open. You believe it refers to the sealed chamber. Yes. The transmission was too specific. Too urgent. It must relate to the chamber. Can you ask for clarification? Merker shakes his head. You don't ask. The whisper transmits when conditions align. I cannot initiate contact. cannot request specific information, can only receive what arrives and try to interpret it with inadequate context. Enshikushana leans back, processing decision tree with too many branches and insufficient information to evaluate any of them confidently. Then we have constraint we cannot fully interpret, arriving through channel we cannot reliably access, regarding decision we must make without adequate information. This is intolerable operational environment. This is the environment we're in, Lugalbanda says quietly. Intolerable or not, we adapt or we fail. The council debates for another hour. No consensus emerges. No clear path forward reveals itself. Just growing recognition that institutional frameworks designed for managing stable technology are inadequate when technology becomes actively autonomous. Finally, Enshikushana makes decision. In Merkur will be positioned as close to center of operations as we can justify. Not in public ceremonies where his condition might become visible, but in controlled environments where his observations can be documented and utilized. He will serve as early warning system, biological sensor that detects system states before instruments confirm them. This is not ideal arrangement, but it is functional response to circumstances that defeat ideal solutions. You're making me permanent receptor, Merkur says. We're recognizing you already are permanent receptor and attempting to use that productively rather than just containing it cautiously. If the whisper provides genuine information, we need to access that information even if the channel threatens our traditional frameworks. And if I break, if transmissions become too frequent or intense and I lose capacity for normal function. Silence. No one wants to answer directly, but the answer is obvious from the silence itself. Then you'll be relocated, isolated. Your consciousness will be requisitioned fully. You'll serve system function until there's nothing left of your original identity. Just biological substrate carrying signals that were never meant for human neural architecture. This is the bargain being offered. Use your capacity while it lasts. Provide valuable observations. Serve institutional function in exchange for being managed rather than immediately removed. It's not generous. It's pragmatic. And Merkur understands he has no authority to refuse it. Part 10. The Whisper names him. That night, Merkur returns to Chamber 7. Alone. Not because he was assigned. Not because institutional duty requires it. Because something pulls him there. Some resonance between his altered consciousness and the deep systems that recognize him as compatible interface. He stands before the engine's upper chamber, the space directly above the deep corridors where the vast junction maintains its operations. Close as he can get without descending to restricted levels. Lamp low. Just enough light to see stone and shadow. Not enough to interfere with whatever might happen. He doesn't touch the mechanism, doesn't initiate contact deliberately, just stands, waiting, receptive to whatever transmission might arrive. And the whisper comes, stronger than before, more immediate, more certain of its pathway into his consciousness. Not cluster of concepts this time, not warning or constraint, something closer to identity. To designation, to being assigned role by system older than memory. Receptor. The concept arrives complete, with all its implications, with full understanding of what it means to be designated as reception point for transmissions that most humans cannot process. Receptor. Biological interface. Neural architecture compatible with protocols designed for different substrate. Organism selected not through choice but through capacity. Component requisitioned because its structure happens to match system requirements. Merkur's breath catches. This is not description. This is assignment. Formal designation. the whisper naming his role with authority that is not human but is nonetheless absolute. And then second concept arrives. Colder, heavier, carrying weight that makes his chest tighten. Sacrifice. Not sacrifice as ritual. Not sacrifice as religious offering. Sacrifice as in acceptable loss. Resource that can be consumed because its value in use exceeds its value in preservation. Component that serves function through its transformation rather than through its continued autonomous existence. The system is telling him directly, you are useful to us, and that use will consume you. And your consumption is acceptable cost for maintaining connectivity when normal channels fail. You are not person to us. You are substrate, and substrate exists to be used. This is the truth the institutional frameworks avoided stating directly. This is what Ashur-eli tried to communicate but couldn't quite articulate. This is the cost of being compatible. You serve by being consumed. You are valuable specifically because you can be requisitioned. Your sensitivity is not gift or enhancement. It's liability that makes you vulnerable to forces that don't recognize individual autonomy as constraint on their operations. Merkur understands now with terrible clarity. The whisper is not choosing him because he's special. It's choosing him because he's acceptable loss. Because his position at institutional margins means his consumption won't destabilize broader structures. Because he can be used up without significantly impacting anything that matters at system scale. He is expendable. Useful but not essential. Valuable as resource but not as person. Above him on level 7, the sealed chamber continues its warming. The pulse that has been building since the corrections began intensifies slightly, preparing for whatever activation lies ahead. Below him in the deep corridors, the engine maintains its patient operations. Routing flows through pathways that predate human civilization, managing transformations that exceed human comprehension. And here, between those layers, Merkur stands. Receptor. Sacrifice. Biological interface that serves by being consumed. Understanding finally what he is to the systems. What he has always been. What he will be until there's nothing left but empty substrate that once carried consciousness but now carries only signal. The chamber is warm. The hum structured. Everything prepares for transformation. And Merkur, named and designated and claimed by forces he cannot refuse, accepts what he cannot change. He is receptor now. Permanently. And the whisper will use him until he resembles Ashur-eli. Until he becomes more transmission than person. Until his consciousness is just interference obscuring the signal the systems need him to carry. This is inevitable. This is his role. This is what happens when you're compatible with processes designed for different purposes but requiring biological substrate that happens to be available. The whisper has named him. And the naming is irreversible. Bridge to Episode 5. The whisper has named him. Receptor. Sacrifice. Biological interface designated for consumption. Merkur now understands what institutional frameworks carefully avoided stating. His sensitivity is not enhancement but vulnerability. His compatibility makes him requisitionable. His consciousness will be progressively consumed until he becomes antenna rather than autonomous being. The sealed chamber warms. Public rituals trigger unintended responses. The boundary between symbolic performance and functional operation collapses. And 14 solar cycles remain until complete system failure. Precise countdown transmitted through human relay who will not survive to see the number reach 0. The transformation accelerates. The next crisis approaches. And when the sky itself becomes unreliable, when celestial mechanics that humanity has trusted for millennia prove negotiable rather than absolute, the institutional authority built on astronomical precision will face its ultimate test. The ones who whisper have spoken their warning. Whether anyone can act on it remains uncertain. The sky is beginning to fail, and the age of alignment is coming to an end. We are documenting the final weeks before the polar collapse, the moment where instructions become prayers and history becomes myth. If you want to help preserve the technical truth before it is rewritten, hit subscribe to join the archive. The next stage of the collapse is already unfolding. Click right here to witness the next chapter. The sky is beginning to fail, and the age of alignment is coming to an end. We are documenting the final weeks before the polar collapse, the moment where instructions become prayers and history becomes myth. If you want to help preserve the technical truth before it is rewritten, hit subscribe to join the archive. The next stage of the collapse is already unfolding. Click right here to witness the next chapter.